Now let's go ahead and try and make what's going to be called a for loop. And the for loop that we're going to make is going to be one that's going to compute factorials for us. Okay, and actually you can kind of see down here, I already tested this out before we started. Let me get rid of that. Actually, I'll just start off as I said we always should. Clear all, close all, CLC. Okay. And let's just hit that so that I lose these variables that were over here. Okay. And again, our goal is to create something that can find the factorial of a number for us. So and so let's just pick an n here to start with. How about we start off with n is equal to 5. Okay. And so down here, let's just compute what n factorial is real quick. Right? You all might remember the factorial would be 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, right? Which I could actually write in here if I wanted to. And actually, I want to mention one other thing. This is really a side note here, but let's say I was writing multiplication with parentheses. You can see that there's a problem here, and the problem is if we're going to do multiplication, you have to use the asterisks. Okay, so if I just went back, in fact, it's recommending to us down here that we type it in with an asterisk in between that 4 and that 5. And if I hit enter, you'll see it works. So we know 5 factorial is 120. And even though we're going to make a script that finds 5 factorial for us, MATLAB actually has a built-in function. Okay. And you can see that built-in function also tells us that it's 120. Okay. All right. So let's start off by making a for loop, and I'll kind of describe to you what it is, and we'll eventually switch to OneNote to kind of write this out piece by piece. But is what we'd really like to do with this is we'd like to do, again, 1, and then times the next integer 2, and then times the next integer 3, and then times the next one, and so on, right? And so is what we'll do is we're going to kind of specify really here the numbers that we want to multiply by, or if we were maybe doing another problem, we might be specifying just how many iterations we want of you know, the for loop that we're trying to do here. So let's try it. For I equals, okay, and when you do this, it could be, you know, 1 colon 10 if you're writing a for loop. That again, this would give us 10 iterations of whatever it is we're trying to compute here. In our case, though, let's just note that no matter what we're trying to compute, there's going to be a 1 in it, right? If whether you're computing 2, 3, 4, 5 factorial, whatever it might be, you're going to start with 1, and you'll move on times 2, times 3, times 4, times 5. So let's just say n factorial equals 1 to start with, and then we'll multiply by all the consecutive integers until we reach whatever n is. Okay. So what we can do here is, since we already have n factorial is 1, I could start this at 1, okay, and I want to go to 5 in this case, or if I'm trying to make this a little more general, how about n? So we're going to go I equals 1 to n. Okay. And the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to say, well, n factorial is equal to, and we're going to want to do I times n factorial. Okay. And so what this is going to do is when I is equal to 1, it's going to take 1 here, and it's going to multiply it by 1. Okay. And so that first step really isn't doing anything, right? The next thing we would have wanted to multiply by was 2. So how about we go I equals 2? This might be a little bit better. Okay. So let's think about that again. We're starting off with saying n factorial is equal to 1. So when we let I equal 2, is what's going to happen is n factorial is going to be equal to 2 times 1. And so what will happen is then n factorial is now going to be stored as 2. But then this loop here is going to move on from 2 to I equals 3. And when we hit I equals 3, it's going to take our previous value for n factorial and it's going to multiply by 3. Okay. And that would give us 6. Okay. And then when I equals 4, we're going to now multiply our previous value of n factorial by 4. So now we have 6 times 4, which is 24, which is technically 4 factorial. And then this loop will end at I equals 5, and we'll finally have 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Okay. And whenever we write a for loop, we need to also write in end here. To specify that this is the end of our for loop. Sometimes we'll have a lot more stuff in between here, but for now this is a fairly simple one. And let's test and see if it works, okay? But I'm going to suppress maybe a couple more things here real quick. Let's suppress this and this. And you might be wondering, well, why am I suppressing this if I'm trying to find n factorial in the end? And the reason is, if I leave it unsuppressed, let me show you what will happen. If I were to move this up, you can see it's making all those calculations. This was 2 factorial, 3 factorial, 4 factorial, and then finally 5 factorial. Or in other words, we had, in this first step, we had 1 times 2, and in the next step, it was really 1 times 2 times 3, and so on. Okay? And we don't need to see all those intermediate calculations. So what we can do is we can suppress that, and we only want to see the answer, so we'll say maybe n factorial. And so what this is going to do now is when I do hit run up here, it's going to do all those little calculations that we talked about, but we're not going to see them, and all we're going to see is our result here. Okay, and you can see it's 120. Okay. But I would like to switch to one note here real quick so you can see kind of why this works or what's going on here. There we go. So if we were to think about this, before we even start the for loop, we have that this n factorial is equal to 1. Okay, and again, I started it this way because every single factorial that we're going to try and compute is going to start with 1. Okay. But then once we get past that, we get into the for loop here. Okay. And so when I is equal to 2, that's what we chose to start with there, we're going to take really our previous value of n factorial, which was 1, right? It's right here. Okay. And we're going to multiply it by I. Okay. So if we multiply it by I, well, I is 2. So we have 2 times our previous value for n factorial, which again was 1. Okay. And so this gives us 2. That's our first calculation here. Okay. Now I'm actually going to get rid of those semicolons so we don't mix it up with our notation in our for loop. And then what's going to happen is after it's made that calculation, it's going to let I equal 3. Okay? And so what it'll do again is it's going to recalculate n factorial, and it's going to be based on using now I equals 3, and then times our previously stored value for n factorial, which you can see up here is 2. And this will give us 6. Okay. And we'll keep going here until we finally get to I equals n, which is 5. Okay. So we still have 2 more iterations of this for loop. Okay. I won't do them all, but let's maybe do one more, I equals 4. So again, we are now going to do n factorial. And we're going to take whatever the value of I is, just again based on this formula that we've written here. So we should have 4, and then times our previous value of n factorial, which is 6. Okay. And then finally, we'd move on to the last one, which will give us that 5 factorial is actually equal to 120. Okay. And you might be wondering, you know, for one, why would we even make this if there's already a factorial function in MATLAB? And the reason is this was a good introduction to for loops, I think, here. Okay. Now, the one other thing I want to say is here in a moment, we'll turn this into a function in our next video. Okay. But also, since we've written a script, now we can easily calculate n factorial for whatever we want. Okay, so let's say I want to compute 7 factorial. All I have to do is go in here and replace that n with a 7. Okay, and you can see n factorial. And if you want to check our work still, you can. We have the built-in function, factorial of 7. Okay, and you can see it gives us the same number. So that is indicating that we've done the right work here. Okay. And now there's lots of bells and whistles that we could add to this script, but for now we are just sticking with the basics. So here is our first for loop. And again, in the next video, we will turn this into a function.